of the Bahá'í Women of London to the first event in a new series, A Vision for Race Unity, Healing Racism. Today's topic is Parenting While Black. Before we begin, please note that no conversation or presentation about prejudice, discrimination, and racism is casual. Some of us here carry the pain of prejudice and the daily lived experience of racism into this gathering, while others are here to see possibilities and to learn and grow. We hope this space will humbly embrace the pain and the possibilities and everything in between. In that spirit of embrace, we wish to acknowledge that London sits on the ancestral traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Lenape-Wook, and Ottawandaran peoples, and it is with gratitude that we are here together and are able to talk about racial prejudice and racism and finding a way forward together towards racial unity. Baha'u'llah, the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith, proclaimed his faith in 1863. Three principles lie at the core of his teachings: the oneness of God, the oneness of religion, and the oneness of humanity. He taught that all human beings are created by one God and are one people. These teachings sit on many principles such as universal education, equality of men and women, harmony of science and religion, the elimination of extremes of wealth and poverty, and the elimination of all prejudice, including racial prejudice. For Baha'is, ending racial prejudice is a social and spiritual imperative rooted in our faith's writings. This series, A Vision for Race Unity, Healing Racism, is being offered to help us understand the individual and systemic pain that exists because of prejudice, discrimination, and racism, to enhance our understanding of the experience and perspective of others, to open our awareness to our own contributions to this current reality, to explore the possibilities and vision of a transformed society, and to take concrete steps towards healing and the building of that new reality of wholeness and oneness. None of us knows the full solution to ending racial prejudice, which for centuries has corroded the whole social structure of both the US and Canada. Ending racial prejudice is a path we have to walk together, Black and white, Indigenous and settler, woman and man, young and old. No sustainable solution can be found that doesn't include everyone. And as women, we can lead with our deep desire for a just, peaceful, and safe world. Our program this morning will open with a prayer, followed by a panel discussion with our four esteemed panelists. So I'd like to open with a prayer. This is a prayer, a Baha'i prayer from Abdul Baha. Please join me in this prayer. O thou compassionate Lord, thou who art generous and able, we are servants of thine, sheltered beneath thy providence. Cast thy glance of favor upon us. Give light to our eyes, hearing to our ears, and understanding and love to our hearts. Render our through thy glad tidings. O Lord, point out to us the pathway of thy kingdom, and resuscitate all of us through the breaths of the Holy Spirit. Bestow upon us life everlasting, and confer upon us never-ending honor. Unify mankind and illumine the world of humanity. May we all follow thy pathway, long for thy good pleasure, and seek the mysteries of thy kingdom. O God, unite us and connect our hearts with thy indissoluble bond. Verily thou art the giver, thou art the kind one, and thou art the Almighty. I'd like to now take the opportunity to introduce you to our esteemed panelists who have generously agreed to share their experiences and perspectives and insights with us today. We have London City Councillor Arielle Kayabaga. Seeking a more stable environment and opportunity, Arielle's family left her home country, Burundi, in the midst of a civil war. In Canada, Arielle faced many of the challenges inherent in most new Canadian stories: insecure housing, precarious employment, unfamiliar systems to navigate. She's become a champion for other newcomers and all London residents, striving to realize equitable and stable futures for their families. After completing her BA in political science at Carleton, Arielle gained experience through her work in caucus services in Parliament Hill. She was one of 29 young Canadians selected to represent the nation's youth at the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. She entered local government as part of the City Hall mentorship program and is now a London City Councillor. Arielle is an active public speaker, has worked with London Black History Committee and Regional HIV/AIDS Connection, and has served on various local boards. Balancing her roles as a single mother, city councillor, community activist, and passionate city builder, Arielle's story is one of breaking barriers, overcoming adversity, and defying expectations. Our second panelist is Jennifer Slay. Jennifer has spent the last 20 years as a registered social worker working with various ethnic and cultural groups. She's a certified life coach, motivational speaker, trainer, and author. Jennifer has earned 2 honors bachelor's degrees, a master's in social work, and is a certified extended disc trainer. She was chosen as one of the recipients of the Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal in 2013 for her community work, and as one of Canada's Women of Confidence in the national publication, Chatelaine magazine. In recent years, Jennifer has co-created All Women Lead, LEAD, an initiative to support women learning how to use and become increasingly more self-aware in their leadership abilities. She's co-owner of the Hive London, a co-working space. When not working, Jennifer spends her time advocating for racial harmony, having co-founded the Black London Network, and serving as current Vice President of the Congress of Black Women and Friends, London. She's currently an active member of Toastmasters and Forest City Kiwanis Club, and Jen believes that to whom much is given, much is required, and therefore works hard to share and learn with others. Our third panelist is Kim Davids Mandar. Kim Davids Mandar is a first-generation Canadian of South African parentage. As a mixed-race woman raised in Ontario, Kim completed her formal education in linguistics, music therapy, education, and capacity development. Her Master's of Science thesis is currently on the topic of intercultural competence in community development. And her first book, Inappropriate, Interviews on the Writing of Difference in Canadian Fiction, is forthcoming from Gordon Hill Press in September of this year. Kim and her husband, Howard, are parents to Anissa, and I'm sorry, I maybe pronounced that incorrectly, Kim, you'll have to correct me, Anissa and Brandon, residing in Guelph, Ontario, where they are actively involved in the Bahá'í community. And our fourth panelist is Colette Chapman. Colette is a clinical social worker here in London and is a member of the Black London Network. She operates from an anti-Black racism perspective and engages in deliberate conversations about implicit bias and its impact on mental health. Colette is the past president of the Congress of Black Women and current president of the African Caribbean Soccer Club in London. Colette is a fiercely authentic therapist and a Black woman with over 20 years experience in child welfare and advocacy for the rights of Black children within that system, race issues, interracial relationships, and parenting issues. Working from an understanding of needing to have tough conversations to address race issues in the workplace, depression and anxiety, and relationship issues, Colette is extremely skilled at getting to the core of the issues. She knows that pretending things are okay when they're not leaves people stuck and unable to move forward. Colette is direct, warm, funny, and works to create an atmosphere of complete acceptance. So as you can see, we have an incredible panel of women with us this morning. We are so honored to have each of you here. As I read through your bios, I feel tired listening that each of you is so involved in the community and doing such incredible work and so accomplished, and just really appreciate you spending time in your busy schedule to come and speak with us this morning. So for our panel presentation, the format is that we will have one question that is asked to each of the panelists, and then we will move into some individual questions unique to each panelist. However, we recognize that each panelist may have comments and things they want to add to what others have said. So when we get to the unique and individual questions, we'll make sure we have an opportunity for panelists to add comment to those questions as well. We have more questions than I think we're going to be able to get through, but we're going to get through as many as we can, and maybe need to have a part 2 of this another time. So for the first question, I will start with you, Colette. Colette, what would you say are some of the challenging and positive experiences of parenting while Black in London, Ontario?
when our family immigrated here from Guyana in South America, we moved to Montreal, where I spent quite a majority, 30 plus years of my life. So moving to London was quite an eye-opener, because I'd never lived anywhere this small. This is small to me. And then when I decided to have a child, I had to really do some thinking about what it's like to raise a Black child in this type of environment where I wasn't seeing myself necessarily reflected as how I saw myself in Montreal at every corner. So that was one of the challenges for me, to make a decision to have a child, to raise a child here. I actually contemplated as well, given I've been living in London for about 20 years. So given the makeup of London as well, I had to make decisions as to whether I was going to move with my child, to give my child that more diverse experience of other cultures around him. Because I didn't want him to be that only Black child in the classroom where people are curious about and want to touch his hair and ask all of these questions. I didn't want that for my child. And as Black parents, we understand we understand these microaggressions to some degree. Also, some of the challenges was finding my community. Where does my community live was the next thing. So some of those were my particular challenges for myself. I'm an adult, and I'm old enough to be able to cope and to still manage some of these systems, even though it is still hard. But I came in recognizing that. But when you have a child in this system, it's just so different. But I would say those are probably two of my bigger challenges. And also not having my extended family here, and not knowing who to lean on as well within my Black community was an extreme challenge for myself. But I went out and I eventually met people. So I have some of those supports and a bit more connection for myself and my son. So that would be some of my challenges that I had.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Colette. Appreciate you sharing that, and that important piece about seeing oneself reflected is really critical for sure. Arielle, your turn. What would you say are some of the challenging and positive experiences of parenting while Black in London? I think you're on mute.
Hi, everyone. Good morning, everybody. Still on mute? Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, the internet never promises anything, so we're going to try our best. And I have the worst internet connection ever. So I was just saying good morning, everybody. It is very nice to see all of your beautiful faces. And thank you for growing up in London. First of all, I was a teen mom. That's important to note, because my experiences varies from different Black moms. I don't think I had ever really thought about what the challenges are for a parent in London until I became much, much older into my parenthood. Like, I think I started identifying some of my challenges when my son was a little bit older and was in school. And I'm trying to advocate for him. So we came from Burundi. My mom was used to the Burundian system. She didn't really know the Canadian system. So she didn't have the same opportunity to advocate for me as I do for Noah. So I think some of the challenges that I think we have is that we still have embedded systemic racism in this city. And it makes it very difficult for us to navigate and live authentic and safe lives when we still have to consider that every system has a barrier for our children. In terms of, education, in terms of what access we have to certain spaces, in terms of some of the resources that are available to us. I think for me, becoming a teen mom or becoming a mom at a really young age really opened my eyes to the systemic disproportions and racism and discriminations that happen. Going back to, even my pregnancy or my birthing process, if it wasn't for God, I possibly could have died because there was nobody who was advocating for me. There was nobody who was making sure that my needs and my wants were being met. I remember I had a gynecologist who I didn't even see for over 5 months. And now that I'm older, I can sit here and think that's crazy. I remember being at the hospital in labor for 29 hours, and every single person knew that my child was in danger, and not one person, suggested an emergency C-section. I still delivered naturally, and thank God, the delivery process happened really quickly. He was delivered in 10 minutes, but I had been in labor for 29 hours with a child who had meconium, who was struggling, whose heartbeat was dropping every now and then. They did everything they can to keep flipping me back and forth, but nobody thought, let's put this girl through an emergency C-section. Nobody was advocating for me. Nobody was there protecting me and protecting my rights and my child's rights. And it was God. God stood there and protected me because he knew what he wanted to do in my life. But these are challenges that are systemic in our country, and we don't even realize them. How many children or how many mothers have we lost through maternal health? How many students are falling through the cracks because the system is not really assisting them, and there's nobody to advocate for them? So I think you have the resources, or you're well set up to even be a good parent to your child, and when you're still facing a system that could potentially be taking your child. So I didn't even advocate for myself at the time because I think I was mostly focused on making sure that I do not get my child taken away from me because of the approach that I was receiving from people. One, I was a teen. Two, I was, a young Black woman. I was your typical statistic, and everybody was treating me like a statistic. So it was really hard for me to be authentic in my parenthood when I was trying to fight to keep my child with me and make sure that, they can stay away from me. I didn't want help. I didn't want anything. I didn't even want to ask any questions because I figured if I asked more questions, the more they're going to want to have the opportunity to take my child. So there's all those things that Colette can even speak on because she works in that system and she understands how that goes. And that there's a lot of Indigenous and Black children who are in the child services system. And that was my fear. So I'm now turning 30 soon. And I don't have another baby, and I don't think I plan on having one anytime soon. But I think I would have loved to relive that experience and know what it feels like to be a mom coming from a place where I know my rights, I know where I stand, and I know how to advocate for myself. Because all of that, the experience of enjoying parenthood for me was stolen from me because I was young and I had nobody to advocate for me or speak up for me or let me know my rights. I couldn't even talk about, my son being sick or myself being sick. I had to fix everything because I had the fear of losing my kid. So I would say that those are the things that we really need to focus on, the resources, the system, the hospital, nursing, mental health supports that should be in place for Black women as well. And then the school system as well, where we need to make sure that we are trying to set up everybody to succeed and provide the appropriate resources to support Black parents.
Thank you, Arielle. one of the things, many things stood out for me. One thing that really stood out for me was your comment about the challenge of living authentic and safe in an authentic and safe way, and raised a lot of issues that I'm really hoping we'll have a chance to talk more about this morning around systemic racism in our community and some of the systems and barriers. And I know each of you will have experiences of that, and also some suggestions and some learnings for all of us to put into practice. Thank you, Arielle. Jennifer, if you could please share with us what some of the challenges and positive experiences of parenting while Black in London have been for you.
Thank you, Heather, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. We had the benefit of getting these questions beforehand, and so when I read this question, part of me was thinking, well, I don't know what it's like to parent not being Black, right? And I was raised in a Black home. I'm first generation Canadian. My parents were from Jamaica. So really my experience, I can only say, is my experience. And I know that there are other Black women that share a lot of my experiences, but I just want to be clear that my experience is my experience, and I don't want to be representing all Black women. And I just want to make sure that that's clear, and no disrespect to anyone. I just wanted to say that. But unlike my sisters here, I grew up here in Canada, or I was born in Canada in northern Manitoba. And so it was even less diverse than London when I moved here 25 years ago. And so for me, when I came to London, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, look at all these Black people. There's people all around. And so when I was having my children here, I thought there are resources for me in terms of Black supports and things like that. Because like I said, I grew up somewhere where I was one of 50 Black people in the community. I oftentimes was the only Black child in the whole school. And my parents were the only Black teachers in the community. So my experience and my perspective is a little bit different. But I can say that in growing up in my adulthood here in London, I've had quite the learning experience in that some of the things like implicit bias and different forms of racism, I didn't even realize until it was told to me, because it was just so normal for me where I grew up. And so the challenges for me were, am I being Black enough? Am I making sure that my children are aware of the things that I wasn't aware of? And a lot of questioning as a Black mother, and whether I'm doing a good job. And I'm not sure if that's very different from other parents in the sense of, am I doing a good job? Because I think all of us just really want to be doing a good job. The positive things is that I have an amazing community here. My closest friends, which one of them is Colette, we've seen our children grow up together, and that's been a wonderful experience. And something that's been very important to me is making sure that my children have those experiences of being around other Black families and other Black people and seeing positive messages, because if I left it to the media, they would think crazy things about themselves. And so therefore, for me, the challenge is just in the learning and making sure that I'm doing that good job that I talked about, and providing those positive experiences for my children that are different from what mass media would portray them to be.
Thank you, Jen. I really appreciate you making the comment. I had intended to say that at the beginning and I forgot to say, so thank you so much for making the comment about each one of us as individuals representing our own perspectives. And I think one of the dangers that we can fall into as we talk about the Black community is that the Black community is incredibly diverse. both diverse in terms of people's experiences as individuals, people's cultural aspects of the Black community. And in some ways, it's not a helpful term because it is so broad. So I really appreciate you bringing that forward, Jen. And I know that as we hear the perspectives from each of the four of you, we will be able to hear that diversity. And that's a wonderful thing. Wonderful thing about being human is the diversity. Also, the piece around the questioning of are you being Black enough really highlights the complexity of all of the issues that we're talking about. Extremely complex and so many layers, and both at from the individual all the way to the systemic level. So thank you for raising those points and the many other points that each of you have raised already. So we have one more panelist to answer this question. Kim, what would you say are some of the challenging and positive experiences of parenting while being mixed race in Guelph, Ontario? So your question is a little bit different, but the same idea. And you did highlight, in an email to me earlier, you had highlighted the piece around mixed race and some of the unique aspects of that. And so would be certainly welcome you to share that with others if you wish.
Sure, thank you. And thank you so much for inviting us. And I'm so grateful to be part of this esteemed panel. It's so lovely to meet all of you and hear your stories. I think just in speaking about that idea of representation, if you feel that, representing white or representing Black is also, not just impossible due to the nuance and complexity of individual experiences, I definitely can't represent mixed race because that's a really huge category. I grew up in Brampton, Ontario as a first generation Canadian. And one of the things that I didn't realize was that I wasn't white. And I didn't realize that until I was 7 and we went back to South Africa. And I had this horrific experience of being attacked by a dog. And we went to the hospital and they wouldn't treat me because I wasn't white. And this experience really changed my perspective when I returned to Canada. And then all of a sudden, a lot of the microaggressions and the hierarchy and the structural racism became very apparent to me because I was so, the cognitive dissonance of that experience and what I was being told and how my mind was being educated in the system here just didn't fit anymore. So that was a very young age, I guess. I was also raised in the Bahá'í community where I had the mindset of I'm a spiritual being and everyone is, and human race is one, and I'm primarily a child of God and we're all that, and so we are universal in that. So then there's the cognitive dissonance of that reality and belief butting up against the microaggressions and the systemic problems that we face and the hypocrisy everywhere. Where we can't live up to that yet and where we're learning how to do that. So in terms of Guelph, I lived in Brampton, as I said, which is a beautifully diverse community in many ways. And then I moved to Guelph. My husband, it's just because we're talking about parenting, I feel like I need to mention him because he played a pivotal role in this, this reality of me becoming a mother. Howard he's white. And it's interesting because part of the challenge of being mixed race is that this idea of othering happens from many directions. So while you can also be welcomed from many directions, you're also othered in many directions. So it creates this interesting tension sometimes socially. Actually, that's a bit of an understatement. It can be really damn hard. But I also wanted to say that my husband presents white. He's Métis, and nobody knows that. And he has no proof of that in terms of documentation, because as you know, with the Métis community, that's a thing, right? Like there was this throughout the history, there was this hope of passing as white, and generationally they were able to, and that resulted in changing of names and burning of documentation and hiding and trying their best to survive. So we have that in our epigenetics. And then you have my experience where I'm very fair-skinned, and when I straighten my hair, I look Asian, and people mistake me for Hispanic or Indigenous. And when I go to South Africa, nobody there believes that I'm Black, but here I'm called Black. So there's all this confusion that happens. So trying to sort that out has been tricky. And often when I'm in a conversation with friends or when I'm meeting people here in Guelph, I just have the sense that everyone's oblivious to that reality. So it's this idea of, again, as Arielle mentioned, not being able to live your truth or feel like you can. And when you do, the risks are different. The stakes are different. It's uncomfortable for people, and you lose your social connections, you lose your support. So to show up honestly is, I think, important for all of us, and it can be particularly different when you have these nuances, I think. Another thing about parenting Black here in Guelph, or parenting mixed race, is that because my husband is white, our children present white. And I've noticed that over the years, it's been increasingly difficult for them to remember their African heritage. And it's being erased gradually and more. And that didn't bother me so much at the beginning. I was so happy that it had the privileges that we enjoy, and I'm grateful for these opportunities. But more and more, it's starting to erase me in the family. And that's really painful. So these things, they're just kind of thrown in the mix of, as Jennifer said, we're all trying to be great parents, and they're just layers, right? And I also want to admit that most of my friends have layers that I just want to be humble in trying to recognize that most of my friends also have layers that I don't understand, and it makes me curious. And I kind of try to err on the side of believing and not assuming that everybody else's life is much more simple than mine. And I try to listen and I try to learn. So I guess those are some. Sorry, I didn't mention two more things I just want to mention. One, this idea of exoticizing difference in a culture is exhausting. I find that really troubling sometimes now, especially with the politics that are going on. I have many opportunities to jump into various communities because I'm mixed race. But at the same time, I don't want to be tokenized. I don't want it to be exoticized because that to me is also superficial. And the other thing is just the exhaustion, the work. I listen to the bios of my fellow panelists, and oh my gosh, I want to give you a swatty somewhere. Because like in writing my book that's coming out in September, for example, one of my professors of Indigenous Studies, Dr. Sherry Longboat, I've learned so much from her, and she's been such a great support. I asked her if she could blurb my book because, that's just part of the publishing process, and you need to have like reviews and support. And she was so encouraging. But I had so much trouble asking her to do that work because it requires for her to like read carefully a book and then put her name to something and trust it and all of those things. But because it also publishes the United Nations a statement for Indigenous people, sorry, UNDRIP, I can't even remember my words right now. I really was hoping she would endorse the book. And in the meantime, she's caregiving. She's a Mohawk woman from Six Nations. She's saving our water. She's a graduate advisor to so many students doing important research, and she's working on 2 of her own manuscripts. And this is in her summer holidays while she's caregiving during COVID. And I just thought, doing this work is exhausting, and yet the stakes are so high, we have to do it. So I just recognize all the effort and work that is put in. And this is a challenge of parenting while Black, because it's not just about parenting, it's about trying to change the system as you go. And it's a lot of work.
Thank you, Kim, so much for sharing your perspective and bringing so many different issues for us to think about. As we've now had, and I just want to let people know, my husband Carl has joined us too. It's his birthday today, so I'm very glad that he can join us. as I've listened to, and I'm sure the rest of us have listened to the responses that the four of you have given to this one question, the number of issues and the depth of that you've already taken us to is amazing. And there's just so much to think about and so many different aspects that we need to better understand as humans and work towards. One of the things that really struck me was both two of you, Jen and Kim, talked about at a certain point of your life not recognizing the racism and the microaggressions that existed because they were so normal. And I think it's really important that, to me, what really stands out in that is that it's so embedded, and we really need to work at unpacking that so that we can all understand what that looks like and what it means and how we all can work towards changing that so that each of us as individuals can truly live our truth. So we have so many questions. I'm going to move on to the next question. And so for this one, this goes to you, Jennifer. And I'm going to ask you this question, but I would encourage the other panelists that if you have comments or anything you want to add, or something that Jen says that makes you want to, say something after she's finished, please know that you will have the opportunity to do that. So Jen, from your perspective, what are some of the challenges that Black children and their parents experience in schools and within the school system?
Thank you, Heather. Thank you for your question. So I just want to preface it by just stating that where I grew up in Thompson, Manitoba, my experience of being Black was just with the few families that were in the community and American TV, right? So that was what I knew about being Black. And as I grew up and became more knowledgeable and more educated, what I've learned since being in London is that the media has created this image of what Black is for so many of us that it's unconscious. We don't even realize. And so one of the issues in schools that I've come to learn is that the teachers, right, and the teachers might have unconscious biases, right, towards my children based on what they know of Black people. My Black child might be the only Black person that they've ever met. And that's a very real thing, right? So what they know of a Black child, if they act up in school, they go to the media of what a Black boy is like, right? And the reason why I know this to be true is because I have experienced it over and over again within the school system. And so what I've had to do is when I speak to the teachers, when I go to the school, I make sure I'm dressed appropriately, right? Not going there in my tracksuit. Nope. I've got to be dressed a certain way and I have to speak a certain way. And when I go, I would tend to bring my father with me if my child's father wasn't available because he was a high school administrator. Right? And I make sure the teachers are aware that we are educated and that we have our family is very close and we're going to advocate for our children. And that might seem like, well, why are you doing that? But it impacts the way my child is treated. There's one time I went to the school and it was with my eldest son. My eldest son is 22 now. And he did something. He got himself into trouble doing something. And we went to the school, and this time it was just me. And the teacher said to me, so Jennifer, what is it that you do? And I said, oh, well, I just finished my master's degree, and I'm a social worker at the Children's Aid Society. And that's where I was working at the time. And her immediate response when the other teacher came in, first thing out of her mouth, oh, did you know that she has a master's degree and that she just was going on like that. And I'm thinking, do you do that for all parents? Like, is that the normal? But I knew what was going on, right? And so I needed to make sure in schools that they know who we are, because it's going to impact how my child is treated. And I attribute a lot of that to what the media has portrayed about Black families. And especially because I was a single mother at that time, right? There were a whole bunch of different things going on. So that's one thing. The second thing is when we make learning about Black history special, then that puts kids, making them feel like they're different. They're very different. As I mentioned before, when I was growing up in Thompson, Black history wasn't even a thing, right? It wasn't even a thing. And I remember when, for those of you who are old enough to remember those 80s and 90s things that shows that they would show on TV, the special announcements when they're talking about different things in school, and then the one Black kid that's in the program who might have had an afro and those tiny shorts that they wear, and they're portrayed in a certain way. Well, I would get so embarrassed. I would get so embarrassed when I would see that and I just felt like all eyes were on me. Right? And I realized for my children, I don't want them to experience that. I don't want them to feel embarrassed. And when we make Black history something special as opposed to mandatory, then it creates a difference for our kids, right? And I don't think that's quite fair. Now, I'll be the first one to say I advocate for Black History Month because it's necessary, but I don't like it. Because I think it should just be part of our learning, okay? And the third thing I want to say for Black families in the system is understanding how to navigate the system. If you can understand how to navigate the system and how to advocate for yourself and your child, then your experience won't be as challenging necessarily. But unfortunately, a lot of people don't. I had the good fortune of growing up with 2 teachers in my household. Both my parents were in education. And then when I came here, I worked in child welfare. So oftentimes I was going with families to help advocate for them. So I know how to advocate for my child within the system. And I think for a lot of families that don't know the system, especially if they're just moving to this country, that's a huge difficulty for them. Because if they don't know how to advocate for their child, then their child will unfortunately get left behind or be judged due to the bias that is there. So that's my response to that question.
Thank you, Jen. I really appreciate the concrete examples that you gave of some of your experiences, and what really stood out is that one of the things that stood out is that real intentionality that you needed to take to counteract the narratives that exist in the media, the narratives that exist within people that they don't realize are there, or they do realize are there, and how there needs to be so much intentionality about counteracting that narrative.
Heather?
Thank you. Yes.
I just want to add something about what Jen said in terms of those experiences. One of the other challenges that parents face, and I don't know if Arielle or Jen face this, schools sometimes have a way of how they think parental involvement should look, okay? So Arielle identified she had her child young. She came, her mother didn't know the system. We have language barriers, we have socioeconomic barriers, we have teachers defining what they think a parent should look like or how they should show up in school in terms of involvement, negating the fact that if you are, there are barriers related to language and all of these things, right? If you don't know the system. The other part of it is they then look at a parent who has to make a choice that I'm either gonna go to work, right? Or I don't have that money to get to the school for transportation, or my husband and I, like, we have to work. He's doing this, I'm doing this, whatever, right? So schools take a look at those things and see it as something really negative. Oh, you know, the mom, the dad, they're not really involved with the child, right? And then begin to start labeling that child, right? Or looking negatively towards that child, right? You know, you have mothers who work 12-hour shifts. You have fathers who work 12 hours and stuff. So some of those factors, right, in terms of the school culture around what parental involvement looks like for them, not necessarily for the parent, but for them. That's it.
Great, thank you for
I
adding
also
that.
wanted to add
Yep.
something to it as well.
Please do, Arielle.
Because, you know, when we talk about school, this is the place that our children spend most of their time. Like 6 hours out of a day is spent at school. And I think it's literally the only space where they spend more time than even with us. I've learned through COVID that the last time I was with my son this much was when he was a baby, because they're in school and they spend all day at school. When they come home, you barely have 2 to 3 hours to hang out with them before they head to bed. So it's important that we address some of the loopholes and issues that are in the schooling system when it comes to Black children. First of all, no school board is currently collecting any race-based data. None. And some of the school boards have reported that the reason why they're not doing it is because they don't have enough Black children to collect any race-based data. But you can collect race-based data when you have 2 people. 1, 2, you just ask them, what's your race? You know, and then that's your race-based data, how you're servicing people based on their race. And so for me, I experienced the school system myself. I came here at a really young age. I was in elementary and moved into middle school and moved into high school. So I had to teach myself how to navigate it because my mom didn't really understand the system. So having a child in the system after I've been in the system, I already know what to look out for. I know that I have to check his files all the time. There's the first experience where I realized, because, you know, for me, my kid is like the sweetest human being that's ever existed. And I know that it's the same thing for every parent. Like, your child is the most innocent, the most beautiful, the most amazing human being that you have to interact with on a regular basis. So when you are dealing with a system that's not treating him that way, it's really violent. It's really violent because I remember Noah being in maternelle 3. I don't know what that is in English, but it's the last, I think it's the last kindergarten year. And Noah was always the tallest. He's often the tallest kid in the class, and some little kid kept bullying him and pushing him. And, you know, I had taught him not to push back because he's the biggest. He's the biggest kid in the class. And I'm like, don't push them back. Don't hit them back, because you will be in trouble, you know, and I don't want to have to bury you ever in my life. And that's a conversation that I was having with my kid when he's still that young, right? And so in the file where they, I guess, reported, because I think at one point he pushed back, and the report was that it was violent. The word violent was used to describe my sweet, human, innocent, lovely child, and I lost it. And that was the day that I decided I'm going to follow his education to the core. Like, they're going to hear from me and of me 24/7. But not every Black parent has that luxury to do that. Like, when you think about a single mom who has 5 kids, and she's got to work, and she's trusting the system to raise her child or to teach her child, to educate her child the same way that they should be educating other kids in the school. And then years later, she finds out it's not the case, you know. And I was still following my son's case. The teachers know me, the school knows me, the principal, nobody at the school, the cleaner knows me, like everybody knows me, because I'm always there and I'm always making sure that my child is safe. I still didn't catch up on the fact that my kid was enrolled in a program that was only for newcomers in the school. He's not a newcomer. Noah was born here at the St. Joseph Hospital, but he was still enrolled in that program. Someone thought that it was appropriate to enroll him in that program, which actually takes him away from some classes and puts him in other programs where they focus on learning English and learning the Canadian system. And that's wild to me, right? Like, if you look at the studies that have been done in some schools where the racism was overboard to the point where they have to actually dig deep into it, you'll find some very, very terrible things. And that's why the schools are not collecting any race-based data. That's why the schools are not dealing with the racism, because it's a lot. And they haven't, it's systemic, it's old, it's been there for a long time, and they haven't been able to address it. So they're scared of what's going to be uncovered when they begin to actually do the work. So we got to get past that. We got to get past the uncomfortableness of what we've done in the past in order to fix it for the future. And so, because a lot of a higher number of Black boys, especially Black boys in the schools, are failing, are dropping out of school early, are not going to university, they don't have high grades. And it's not that they're not smart. It's that they're dealing with a system that's against them. Another example, or my last example on this, Noah goes to a French first language school, and there's a lot more diversity in the teachers at the school. So we've only had Black teachers before kindergarten. So starting from grade 1 up to the grade he's in today, we've had only Black teachers, because I purposely picked them. Because I said, I want my child to go to school and deal with other issues other than his race. So I'm always, if there's an available Black teacher, I'm going to pick a Black teacher, because I want to do my job at work, not worrying that racism is going to be chasing my kid all day for 6 hours of his day. The 1 year where we didn't have a Black teacher, I actually had children's services called on me. And not only did I have children's services called on me, for a whole year, every week, I would get an email from his teacher complaining about my child. My child couldn't breathe, couldn't sneeze, couldn't stand, couldn't go to the bathroom. He couldn't do anything in peace. And I thought to myself, I know this kid. He's not, yes, he gets bored in class. They sit for a long time, and he can walk around and we can have those conversations, but he's not the most terrible kid in the world. Why am I getting communications every day? And what led to the whole children's services being called was a conversation I had with him. I said, listen, I'm tired of getting an email from your teacher. If I get another email from your teacher, you're in trouble. So every single time he got a warning that she's going to send an email, he would lose his mind. He would cry, because he's like, we've had this conversation with my mom and she's not okay with it. Just to say, children's services showed up and realized that this was not the right situation. But can you imagine if I would have been a single mom who's falling through the cracks, whether it be financially, whether it be through time or resources for my child, if I didn't have any support systems in place, I would have had my child taken away from me. But yet there are actual situations where people can show up and find kids laying in the midst of needles, in the midst of drugs, and they're not taken from people. That there's a huge gap in the way that we deal with Indigenous and Black children. And we just want our kids to succeed. And at this point, I can't safely say that the school system is safe for my child. I have to be the watchdog 24/7. And I always apologize to teachers. I'm like, I apologize. I'm going to seem very aggressive or too assertive, but I need to receive a report every week. We need to be in constant talk. I need to know. I don't want to be surprised a year later that you've oriented my child into non-academic studies when you didn't warn me. So I hold the teachers accountable, and it's not accessible to every parent to do that. I do it because I know the system. I do it because I know what happened to me, what was in my file, what the teachers did to me. So that's why I step up for my kid or show up for my kid the way that I do. But imagine how many more parents who are immigrants, who have language barrier, who don't understand the system, and parents who actually, quite frankly, don't have the time to be following up every single step. A lot of parents find out that something is wrong when their kids are oriented in a non-academic course. And it's late because it's been planned and organized that way for so long, right? And so I think the Ontario system is going to change, because the government just made that change where they offer more opportunities for kids to go to university instead of just college. But that's a system that's broken from a lower level. It's from elementary school. It doesn't start at the high school level. It starts at elementary school. Even the way they teach our kids, they're passing them and they don't know how to write. They're passing them. They don't know how to read. But there are tutors that are available for non-Black children. the issues are so deep. And as soon as the school boards accept to begin to collect, to reevaluate the system, we're just going to be sharing our stories, because every single one of us has a story about the school system. Every single Black parent has a story about the school system. So are we going to continue to listen to our stories, or are we actually going to take action? I'm interested in action based, and I know it's not going to be in this room, but I'm sure many of you know a lot of people who work in the school boards and the school systems. They need to step up. They need to step up, because we are losing our children, and we've been losing them for a long time. It's like being a Black parent is something that you intentionally do. I know that it's natural because we're Black and there's no other life that we know how to live, but it's intentional when you're a Black parent, especially to a Black boy. You're intentional about everything you do, and you're paranoid. You spend all your years parenting in paranoia, and that's not okay. It takes away, again, that authenticity that we just want to live authentic and free and safe.
Thank you, Arielle. I can, as you talk about situations where things are interpreted differently or expectations are set for your son because of who he is and what he looks like. Carl we've got lots of examples too of that, and it's something that needs to change for sure. I just really want to quickly insert as well, when you talked about watching your files, I had a flashback to when our oldest was about 2 weeks of age. He was hospitalized briefly for a minor health issue, and I, as a new nurse, a nursing student at the time, actually, I was really curious to look at his file. So I opened his file when I was in the hospital, and he had at the time he had slate gray nevus, which is also known as Mongolian spots, and it actually in my chart said that they were querying that they were bruises and he had been abused, and based on this misunderstanding of a biological condition that's completely harmless. Anyway, just lots of there's so many different stories, many different stories from all of us. Kim, I just want to ask if you have anything you'd like to add to this question about the schools, and then I think what we should do is jump to Colette, your question around strengthening the school learning environment. So did you have anything, Kim, you'd like to add about experience in schools and within the school system?
Yeah, just briefly, my son had eye surgery when he was 2, and we thought it had been corrected. He had glasses, and he was, my daughter was older than he is. She's 22 now, but she had been in the same school, and the teachers knew her. I thought knew us, but my son was treated very differently. And with his binocular vision that hadn't been diagnosed, he was exhibiting many sort of troubling behaviors and that were, I felt, treated very unfairly. And as we tried to address this, it was very, again, these were things I recognize what Arielle was saying, like, you're parenting your kid and you don't realize some of the issues until much later in your parenting. And some of this, I was very confused. I was very confused by how I was being treated. And then when I brought my husband in, who's very white, blonde hair, blue eye, we're treated very differently. And I was so offended and frustrated by that because, well, for I guess obvious reasons, but it took many years to address the problem. But I think there are just so many layers here of, like, they just didn't want to be blamed for his failures. They didn't want to be held accountable for whether he was succeeding in the system. They didn't want to be blamed. And there are just so many layers of shaming, blaming, but what all of it serves to do is to reduce things beyond their nuance, and you just get treated as an objectified. And when that happens, nothing works. And it takes away our humanity. And I just feel like that was, I guess, to boil it down, the problem I had. Yeah, and there are many books in there of just like the pain of that and the emotion of that and the stakes, because again, by the grace of God, it was figured out that he had because we were also, he was sent to a psychologist. I was brought to a panel to investigate child abuse. It was crazy. I just felt like I was in a bit of a surreal dream when all of this was happening. Yeah, anyway, so not to get into too much detail, but I concur. And as I'm learning now, I'm part of a race unity discussion and study group, just to try to figure these things out with a group of friends. And we're just trying to dive into resources, because to me, it's all about process. It's all about processes that we put into place to counterbalance these inequities. And part of that, I've been learning a lot from, you guys know Tricia Rose? She's in Brown University, and she's the director of the Center for Studies of Race and Ethnicity in America. And we can't talk about this without talking about whiteness, right? Like, because they don't have a White History Month here. There's no White History Month here. And I think denying the fact that there is a dominant culture is a part of the problem, right? And it's like, how do the fish recognize the ocean? We're all swimming in it. And I just feel like we have to really believe people when they tell you these stories. And it might be at the level of stories. It's getting more into the level of research and data. You look at Ryerson University's research on, well, Toronto, but also the Peel District School Board. Everything Arielle's saying is supported by the data. And it hasn't changed for decades, because they did these studies a while ago. But they're redoing them because that's what has to happen, right? It's like, look, we told you before, but now we have to tell you again. And we're going to tell you again with data, and we're going to tell you again with science, and we're going to tell you again with every credible possible voice you might be able to hear, because we're going to just keep having to say it, right? And aren't we all like that? And how do we do that and not lose our humanity? How do we do that and still be able to love and to be able to show love and to be able to move forward together in this? And I feel like this is one forum to do that. And it's just part of a very long and ongoing conversation, right?
Yeah. Thank you, Kim. It's going to be a long process, and there are going to be parts of the process that are really challenging, and we have to go through this process. We have to work through this because it can't stay the way it is. Thank you for, you talked about data. Arielle talked about data. That's one example. Talking about also changing the narratives that teachers and other administrators have of Black children in the school system. I'm going to go to Colette now, to your question, Colette, because it really leads into this. So Colette, your question, what are a few things that could be done to strengthen the school learning environment for Black children?
I think Arielle hit a bit on it with some respect. I think for one thing, if schools would actually realize disparity and disproportionality in terms of their Black students, how they're being treated. And Kim, you said it too about the Peel. You know, I don't know if everyone remembers seeing the video of the 6 or 8-year-old little Black girl that got handcuffed in school in the Peel district, right? In terms of behaviors. So in terms of you know, school systems tend to label our kids as problems, right? Based on behaviors, which I'm pretty sure some have and some other kids have as well, right? But when it comes in the form of a Black body, it is very different. And Kim hit on it with this narrative that is there, right? So there's this narrative that has weaned its way down into people's heads, right? And especially teachers, everybody, but this is how people react based on those narratives, right? So I think it would be good, do the race-based data, identity-based data, recognize the disparities and the disproportionality in the system, analyze actually discipline methods that are being used within that systems as well. Black parents and white parents navigate the system differently. If you want to talk about research, it also says that example that Arielle put forward. When a racist incident happens, parents tend to show up for those things. And that is how some Black parents get more involved in the system. And there's research that goes beyond that. I think if the school can acknowledge that parental involvement also looks different for everyone, It's not this one big encompassing circle. People chop off what they can handle, right? Based on the things we talked about before, socioeconomic, language barriers, supports their work as well. So I think they need to recognize that. Sorry, I'm getting something in my throat. I think if they could realize that each person is unique as well, and we're not painting everyone with the same brush in terms of people in general. I think one of the things that someone hit on it, if a parent is verbalizing something, listen to them, right? And that's going to be hard, we know, because you're also coming with that narrative that you already know about Black women or Black men or Black kids or whatever that has been told to you, right? So the ability to listen to them. And I think it would be, if the school system could also acknowledge that all of these intersections are happening and working at the same time, right? With respect to that, I think those are probably some of the things that could make it a bit better. You know, Jen talked about the Black History Month. You know, it's really weird because I think I was having this conversation with my husband when we were talking, and it's like, you know, these are not things we have back in the Caribbean, right? Because Black is Black is Black. Black teachers, Black postman, Black this, and all of these things, right? So I know we have to keep it alive and have it here. And we have to keep it alive for a purpose, right? Because this is how the system is designed, right? So because our stories are hidden or not told, this is one of the ways to tell it. But I guess I think about the point, like, such a shame that it has come to that we actually have to we have to do this to keep our presence alive and our presence known, right? So I think it would be a great idea, as Jen said before, if it was just the norm, right? We just learn all the things we need to learn about each other, right? And then we won't have to first this and those types of things, right? So that's how I kind of see some of it happening within the school system. And the biggest thing I want, though, is to stop criminalizing our kids within the school system. That's a huge thing, right? Based on their behavior, and working within the system of child welfare. Certainly, I've seen those within that system. We've seen definitely some of the implicit biases come up with the calls, with the interaction with the kids, statements that have been made as well by certain teachers. I mean, they've all been addressed in terms of things I've seen, but just those things to be aware of.
Thank you. Yeah, Jen, go ahead.
I just wanted to add to that. And Heather, you touched on this, and this is something that I've mentioned before, but with regards to education system, there needs to be intention, right? Intention in everything that they do. So our brains, our mind, or our behaviors are directed 95% by our subconsciousness, right? And so what impacts the subconsciousness are everything that you read, everything that you see, people that you hang out with, all of those things impact our subconsciousness. And therefore there has to be intention with regards to the hiring. Who are the teachers in the school? Who are the administrators in the school? If they all look the same, there's a huge problem, right? What are the posters that are up in the school? Do they all look the same? Because if so, that is a problem. The music in gym class, what music are they listening to? Because that's impacting them as well, right? What are the books that they're reading? Are there any Black authors? Are there any Indigenous authors, right? We have to be intentional on everything that we put into their minds. They're sponges, right? They take in everything. And so it's really important because, like Arielle said, they're in school most of the time. That's where they're being influenced so much. And so we don't want to leave it up to chance that they might understand who they are and all of those things. We have to be intentional with regards to what's being fed into their subconsciousness, because that is going to impact their behaviors.
Thank you, Jen. The two of you have talked about listening and validating experiences, looking at research and making sure we're understanding what's going on, ensuring we educate and raise awareness of the educators and all those involved. We understand the impact of intersection, the intersectionality of all of the experiences. So we have intention around our hiring processes, around all of the music, the graphics, the books, what we're allowing our children to be exposed to within the school system. Those are all amazing, amazing. I'm wondering if there are any other, anything else that any panelists would like to add to this particular question of what needs to be done to strengthen the school system and the learning environment. And I can't really see hands, so if any of the panelists want to speak, just put your video on and add in.
Yeah, I'd like to just share one thing that has helped with my daughter is she went to a school, she had to leave her school. She had to leave. And she ended up going to a charter school where they prioritize moral leadership. And this was really helpful because it was prioritizing values that transcended our material sort of definitions and all these sort of reductionist definitions of human beings. And it was a really diverse membership, a really great, mix of people, and it was by no means perfect, and it was challenging in a lot of ways. But there was this underlying different sort of foundation where leadership was defined by qualities that were like the ability to empower others before yourself, the ability to see beauty in things, the ability to, so they were just things that weren't hung up on these sort of hierarchical labels that are imposed by white supremacist thinking and the white supremacist narrative and the white supremacist culture that is unconscious and informing that subconscious that Jennifer talks about. So I feel like figuring those things out and then finding like-minded people, that brings me a lot of hope, because I've been able to find a lot of like-minded people of every race and of every inclination and every background who are just tired of the limitations imposed by these very superficial things and reductionist things. And not that we know what to do, but that we're trying to be intentional, we're trying to be mindful and try to figure that out where it's not so limiting, because human beings can be pretty incredible. And this kind of imposition of these reductionist realities, which we're swimming in, right? That's the ocean, that's the culture. We have to shift it. And it's a lot of work, but we have to agree first that it needs shifting. We have to agree that there's much more beyond this, and then engage in processes around that. So I think that idea of leadership and what it looks like, what does it look like in our family? How is love part of that? And not to be caught up in the assumptions and the narratives that are imposed on us, especially by media. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And it's aggressive, and it's fueled by materialism, and it's fueled by so many things that are layered. A couple of other scholars I just want to mention, Michael Carlberg, he's a sociologist who has a great TED Talk, 2012, that's Beyond the Culture of Contest, because we also have this idea of survival and competition rather than empowering one another and working together. One of the things that has been mentioned, I think it was Colette talking about how in the Peel system, Black kids and kids of color are called out for their behavior. This is addressed also by Dr. Tricia Rose's research that looks at what does structural racism look like compared to the barrier for overcoming it, which she identifies as color blindness. And color blindness will reduce things to behavior, individual behavior, and structural racism recognizes it as a product of a systemic problem. And it's very good research, and it's something I'm trying to learn about. So I just want to offer that as well.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you for mentioning some of these wonderful resources. I'm wondering if you would be, if it's not too inconvenient for you to even type some of these into the chat so that other people who are on the call, we've got about 40 people on the call, that they can access some of these resources. That would be wonderful. Thank you. Okay, the next question I think we've got until 12 o'clock, so we're going to try to get through two more questions at least. So we have a question for Arielle and one for Kim. and of course, we'll open it up to everyone else if you'd like to add comments. So Arielle, in your opinion, what are a few things that could be done now to ensure Black parents and their children in our community feel safe, included, and valued?
Thank you, Heather, for this question. I went over this question this morning, and I was as I was thinking about a really theoretical answer I could give to this, and then I was reading it again so I can answer that, and I was like, I don't think this is right. I think, what do parents want, whether Black or not Black? It's to have successful children. It's to sometimes, realize the dreams that, sorry, just a second. It's okay, Noah, don't worry about it. Sorry, my son's talking to me at the same time. It's to be able to see, to see the dreams of their children fulfilled, to live a long life and see their grandchildren and great-grandchildren. We all share the same desires as parents. Our experiences become different based on our race because of an issue that we haven't dealt with, of systemic racism that we haven't really dealt with. So when we're thinking about, sorry, Noah, I'm talking. When you're thinking about, I do apologize, this is the new way of life, COVID and children. My coworker does not keep quiet when I'm talking. When we think about how we want parents to thrive in a community, and we are not really addressing, again, the barriers that parents face, then we're not going to be able to, I can't answer that question, because the question goes back to everything I've been saying from the beginning of this conversation to now, is we have challenges in our system that make us stand out. I don't want to stand out as a Black parent. I just want to be a parent. And one of the things that's really amazing when you're a parent, and I'm sure many of you can relate, when you meet someone, you don't really know them, moms especially, we tend to talk about our kids all the time. Like, I love talking about my kid. I love talking about how great my kid is and what he's doing, some of the things he's talking about, and what's the new, watching him grow, watching him have a personality and interest and things that he wants to do, dreams that he has. It makes me, Noah, can you wait? Sorry. He makes me want to, it makes me want to talk about it all the time. So when I meet other moms, the first thing that we have in common is that we can sit in a room as people who don't know each other, who don't have the same background, who don't have anything in common. But the minute you're a parent and you say, my child, everybody lights up in the room because they're like, my child too, because that's something that is relatable to every single person. We don't have to think about race and gender and discriminations and socioclass and all these things when we both have children. So I want to do that. I want to be able to continue to enjoy being a mom, talking about my son's dreams, talking about, some of the things I'm learning from him and about him, without having to stand out as a Black parent. But I stand out because the system is set up so that I stand out. I stand out not in a positive light because the system has made it that way. So if we're talking about how we can keep a safe space or community or society for Black parents, in this context, in the London context or the Canada context, we need to really tear down the system. We need to remove the barriers that are causing us to feel unsafe in public spaces. I'm embarrassed when I'm at a shopping store with my son and someone is swallowing over me. It's embarrassing. It's embarrassing to have to explain that to my kid. It's uncomfortable to have to remind my son not to do certain things because I don't want to bury him. It's frightening to live in a society where I have to think about every single step I'm going to take to make sure that I can still keep my child alive. And I like to make this joke that I don't have a spare child. So many of you have more than one children. I only have one. I don't have a spare child. So I overprotect my child for that specific reason, right? But at the same time, it's, for me, I'm trying to live in a world that I can just be authentic, safe, and happy, and continue to see my dreams and my son's dreams lived out fully. I want to see him live out his full potential, his full purpose that he came here to accomplish. So didn't plan to say this. I planned some other things. I was going to get into the policies that need to be changed, but I already talked about that. It's the entire system altogether. It isn't just a school. It isn't just, it's streets, it's public spaces, access to community events, access to public spaces, access to transportation, access to even services that are meant to protect me and my child. Sometimes it's not even available for me. So how are we going to ensure that our mental health is prioritized, our safety is prioritized, our well-being is prioritized? It goes back, the finger points right back to the system. And some people haven't caught up on the understanding that systemic racism is real. And that's a problem. That's a problem because when I hear those things, I then start planning how much longer I have to keep fighting and protecting my child. And it's draining. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Arielle. Please, Colette, go ahead.
You know, I was thinking about something. My son is 18 now. And I remember when I found out I was pregnant with him. And I thought, okay. Because immediately what I began to think about was exactly what Arielle said, all the things and the implication of having a Black male child, right? And this is while I'm pregnant with him. This child isn't even born yet, right? So these are the things that fall into our mind. When I looked at this question too, and I thought about something, and I think I viewed it a bit similar and a bit different as Arielle did. What is being, and I think I thought about what does being safe mean, and where does someone stay safe? And I realized not everyone's home is necessarily safe for them or their children due to whatever else is going on in the home. And then I thought back to, when is it that we as Black people, including children, have ever been safe, right? So then your mind goes back to our ancestors with slavery, never been safe. Been sold. The girls, the boys have been sexually assaulted. They have been ripped away from their parents. So you have this legacy of unsafety still being given down to our children. We tell them stories to keep them alive that our parents told us because that's how they kept alive. We inflict trauma with those stories, but at the same time trying to inflict resilience with those stories on how you stay alive. Because as Arielle said, we don't want to bury our children, but it's a very much reality. And when you think of safety, I have to look this up on Facebook to remember. If you look at the killings that have happened of Black youth, Black women, Black men, you can't read a book, you can't jog, you can't do this, you can't do this. There's a litany of things that you would think that are safe for you. And maybe if you're in white bodies, those things are safe, right? But if you're in Black bodies, there's a litany of things that everyone takes for granted that you can just get up and do that does not keep us safe and does not keep our children safe, right? You're in your home. How does a police break into your house and shoot you, right? We've seen that happen in the States. You're out for a jog. How does someone drive by and open up gunshot on you and kill you, right? There are these things that just keep happening to our bodies and our kids, which people take for granted in their everyday life, that we as Black parents raising Black kids cannot take for granted under any circumstance. So it's always this daily conversation with our kids, telling them this, make sure that, because we want to make sure they come home, right? I am not sure who else, besides our Indigenous friends perhaps, who else has to do this. This is part of your socialization of being a Black parent with a Black child.
Thank you, Colette. One of the other questions that we had put out to the panelists was around what are the things that that as Black parents that you feel you need to teach or share with your children in order, because they are Black children. And Colette, you've really touched on, actually all through, a number of you have alluded to or spoken of the realities of some of these things that need to be told to keep your children safe. And so thank you for helping us understand that reality and see that there are things that as Black and people of color, as parents, that you need to be thinking about and are thinking about that white people are not thinking about. So thank you for sharing those. Are there any other panelists who want to speak to this question about ensuring Black parents and their children in our community feel safe, included, and valued?
Yes. I feel pretty valued today. I really have to say that, and I'm grateful. And I just want to say also that this is a very this doesn't happen to me often. Actually, I can't remember a time when I've had this kind of opportunity. So maybe creating more spaces where people can be listened to and honored and valued for just having the space to explore. Because one of the things that I was raised, and again, this epigenetics is an interesting field to research, because I could never, I'm older and I'm still learning about that. My parents escaped South Africa during apartheid so that they could try to provide a safer environment for me. And I didn't understand that or why. And I didn't understand why my mom wouldn't let me have curly hair my whole life. I didn't understand that. And then I learned later that, that was a matter of life and death for them in South Africa. It was a matter of, the pencil test. You probably have heard of this many times, but you get arrested and somebody pulls a pencil through your hair. If they can't get it through your hair, you're charged as a Black person, and the punitive reality of that is much harsher than if you have smooth hair. So I don't even think my parents were conscious of why they demanded that I have straightened hair. And it was such a trivial thing for me, because I didn't get the background. And that's a very minor tip of the iceberg kind of experience, like in terms of their PTSD and how they inflicted on me, because I didn't realize that every time I walked out the door, they were worried I was going to die. I didn't get that, but I felt it. I felt that urgency and I felt that pressure. And then I had the cognitive dissonance of feeling safe in some ways, and realizing and like not wondering why my parents were so crazy, and the dynamic that brings into my family, anyway. So I just, to have spaces where I don't have to be found out. I don't have to worry about protecting and hiding, and I don't have to worry about that, and just passing and pretending. Where I can actually talk about these feelings and these difficulties in a way that they're not exoticized. They're also not, I'm not shamed for them. And where, so I feel like that creates value. And a big part of that, in what I'm learning in a literature circle, is, as Jennifer mentioned, what kind of books are we reading? What kind of movies are we watching? What kind of conversations are we having? And do we carve out space for that? Do we hold space and protect that space without judgment? And I feel like that's a real skill, and it takes a great deal of attention and intention and practice. So I feel grateful. I feel like we're trying to learn about that, and more places we are trying to learn about that, but it does take energy.
I just want to add something quickly, Heather, if I can. So this answer is going to sound kind of like unicorns and rainbows. However, at the same time, I think it's important for all of us to be able to have these conversations with our children. Doesn't matter whether you're Black, you're white, you're Indigenous, we need to have these conversations and bring it into their awareness, so that they can start having conscious behaviors themselves, like of what they're learning and what they're noticing, right? I know that my children have gone to school and several times have been called the N-word, right? And this is at a very young age. And I know that the kids that said it to them don't even know what that means. They don't understand it, right? They just heard it somewhere. They know that it hurts a Black person when you say it, so I'm gonna say it to them, right? But sitting the kids down and speaking to them about what that word means, the history of that word and why it's not okay, right? Instead of just, well, the kids got suspended. Because when I go to the school, right, in these recent years, the first thing they do is they suspend the child that said the word. And it's like, okay, great, something's being done, but so what type of education is that child going to get so that he understands why that was not okay? Right. And so I think it's the responsibility of all of us as parents to sit down and have these conversations. And if we don't know the answers, to be okay to ask somebody, right? Ask somebody, open up a book, be intentional about everything.
Can I just jump in here for 1 second? Maybe all of us have a story about the N-word, but I had this memory of being a little kid, like I was in kindergarten, and I came home for dinner. The only part of this story that I remember for sure and certain and remember is I was eating dinner with my family, and we were eating corn on the cob, and there was one kernel of the corn on the cob that was dark, that was brown. And I looked at my corn on the cob in total innocence. And I was like, oh, look, an N. And my dad had to leave the table. And everybody at that table were shocked. I had no idea what I had said. I was, 4, 5? And nobody had the conversation with me. All I knew was that something huge was around. And I didn't know if it was because of my corn. Like, I didn't know why. And there was no space or capacity to have that conversation because there was so much pain, and I just never understood. So there's just so much that's unsaid, and there's so many conversations that need to be had, you know? And I think paying attention to that, I agree. Like, how do we do this? It's messy.
Thank you. Christina posted a comment here in our chat box, and I just want to really draw attention to it and just pause for a moment to thank you, each of you, so much for what you are teaching and for the learning that's happening, and for the courage, as Christina said, for sharing and being vulnerable. I'm conscious that couple people have posted about a tornado warning. I'm just conscious. I want to make sure everyone knows that that's the case. I don't know if that's the case for you, Kim, in Guelph. But just to say to people, if you need to go somewhere safe, please do that. And I think because of that, we will probably just try to wrap up. The last question was really yours, Kim, and you've talked about some of these pieces already. But and you had two questions that were kind of related. So I'm going to say both of them, and then you can speak to how you'd like. You can proceed how you wish. So one question for Kim was, what are some of the things that you teach or tell your Black children? Sorry, that's the wrong one. What are one or two things you think parents of non-Black children can do to help raise children who contribute to race unity? And the second question that Kim was looking at was, what is an example that gives you hope about our community's progress towards racial unity? And we've heard bits and pieces of this throughout the discussion, but If you could lead us off on your thoughts on this, Kim.
Yeah, sorry, I feel like I don't want to overtalk. I mean,
It's wonderful. Don't apologize. Don't apologize.
I appreciate that. I recognize too, like, and I just want to share this very openly, and because not having spaces like this where when you do have a space, it's kind of like it becomes Niagara Falls, right? Like it's like everything. So I just want to say that that's how I'm feeling in my heart right now. So I apologize if this is not as condensed or precise as it could be. So yeah, I feel like I have sort of talked around that so already. But one thing I feel that all non-Black, all of us can do is to become scientists, like to become seekers and curious and cultivate those skills of a scientist, cultivate those observational skills and the humility of, you know what, I actually don't know. And then I feel like that just opens the door for so much. And it reaches beyond the status quo, and it transcends the tunnel vision pull of a dominant narrative. It helps us to create new narratives. It helps us to try things out. Be courageous so that we can take risks together and make places safe from shame and judgment so that we can take risks, because we cannot move anywhere without being creative, and we cannot be creative without feeling safe, and we cannot feel safe if we feel judged and criticized and blamed and marginalized. So they all ripple together, and I think humility is a huge thing. And honesty and truthfulness. And what does that look like? So for me, that looks like reading more widely, trying to meet more people. And that can be tricky, right? Because I don't want to like poach community spaces. I don't want to be this like inserting myself in ways that are aggressive or that are disruptive, right? So how do you meet people? I feel like a lot of this can be just our own education we can do before we even connect with a human being. There's so much available to us. These lectures online, every university has like free lectures. There's so much available. The other thing, the question about what gives me hope. I got to tell you, when I went to the BLM march here in Guelph, I was shocked that there were like 5,000 people there. There were more people here than in Ottawa. There were more people here than in the surrounding cities. And I didn't realize how much grief I think I was carrying in my cells until I stood there, and I was there with my daughter, who, again, that was a very interesting experience to go with her, because she, again, appears white, has been passing white, but is also mindful, and she doesn't even try to talk about her culture anymore. She's shut down so often, and she's like, forget it. People don't even believe that I'm South African. Sorry, here's the Niagara Falls part. So I went to a football game with my daughter. Or I picked her up there, and she was with all of her friends. And her friends, honestly, the first reaction was, "That's not your mother." And it's kind of one of those "that's the nanny" stories. And she gets that all the time. And anyway, so we're at the BLM march, and we're standing there together, and she just keeps holding my hand real strong, because I think she can feel its impact on me. And then when they finally got, past the presentations, which were beautiful and wonderful, and the information that was shared and the respect, and the climate was great. I was really impressed, which is very different from what happened like 30K north of here, where they had like disruption and people and white supremacists coming to shut it down. That didn't happen in Guelph. I was grateful. When they invited all the BIPOC people to be close to the banner of the march, right? Because there were so many of us. I was there. Like, I was like, I'm walking there. That's where I'm going. And she held me back. She's like, I can't go there. And that's how I felt when she held me back. And I'm like, we're going. And she's like, and she had to make a decision. She had to make a decision if she was going to drop my hand or if she was going to come with me. And I'm grateful. I don't know what that means, but she came with me. And we walked that march. And as a result of that experience, we now have an opportunity to have different conversations. And so for me, again, it's part of a process. What processes are we taking tiny steps towards, and what does that mean? What are the implications, you know? Like, I didn't realize, I've become conscious now how much everything I was trained to do was to become as white as possible. Everything in my life, I've been trained to be as white as possible. And as Arielle was mentioning, what does that do to your mental health? What does that do to your mental health when you believe in your heart and soul that we are all one? When you absolutely, from your depths of everything you know and believe, that we are one, and yet your everyday experience is not that. And you so desperately want to connect on that level. And then all this violence is happening, you know, and you're not even aware of it. And then you realize you perpetuate it yourself, right? That's even worse. You know, when I use the N word and I'm 5 years old and I have no idea why I'm doing it, and the impact it has on my environment, I'm perpetuating the same violence because I'm being trained to. You know, like, that's horrible guilt and survival guilt and horrible mental pressure to kind of have to be honest about, right? So what gives me hope is that I have a community where these conversations are becoming more prevalent, where I'm finding like-minded people who are open to being scientists and who are okay with investigating the truth together and having hard conversations and being willing to say that I don't know.
Thank you, Kim. Any of the other panelists? Colette, Arielle, Jen, would any of you like to comment on these questions around helping to raise children who contribute to race unity, or talking about examples that give us hope about our community's progress towards racial unity?
Yeah.
Sorry,
go ahead, Jen.
Okay. I just wanted to quickly just say, in terms of what gives me hope, is that last month, in the midst of a pandemic, 10,000 people in the City of London came together for the Black Lives Matter march. That gave me hope. I stood there and I was like you, Kim, just kind of in awe, and I just started to bawl, because I never felt that kind of support and love before. And so that's something that gave me hope right there, and kind of energized me, because I've been taking a back seat to a number of things, and now I'm like, okay, gotta keep working, gotta keep going, right? So.
Thank you, Jen. Anyone else? We have 10 more minutes. Anyone else want to comment on this?
Yeah, I think what I can say is that we are taking, in the last couple of months, we've been taking major steps. They may seem really small to some people, but these have been gigantic steps. And I feel like there are conversations that I'm having today that when I was having them 2 years ago, it was super uncomfortable for a lot of people. I could feel the room zoom in on me and close, like, just want to swallow me up, you know, for saying what I was saying. And now it's not only falling on listening ears, it's like you can tell that people have actually started doing their own research and understanding of what we're talking about. So I also want to recognize the passing of an amazing hero, John Lewis, who was he is a historic person, iconic person. I hope everybody remembers him for more to come. And he just passed on 2 days ago, and I was saying, you know, you've lived your purpose when in your death, life is still being born. Like, something is still igniting people and creating life and building people. So when I was reading on him a little bit more on the day of his passing, and I found out that for him to be in this fight for civilization, for basic rights to humanity, and for humanity to come together for over 50 years, he did something that is extraordinary. He had a mental fight, and he's had this mental fight for a long time, which resonated with me because I had been trying to figure out ways to sustain myself in this in this walk, in this fight, because like I said earlier, it is very draining. It takes a toll on your mental health, and it sets us back, because when we're not doing well mentally and spiritually and emotionally, we are unable to bring about change. And I really wanted to know, how did he stay in this thing for 50 years? And as I was feeling somewhat sad that in his passing, this freedom that he's been fighting for, this fight that he's been on to attain our humanity come together, and the basic needs of the people be met, he's dying and he's passing on, but that hasn't happened. But what happened, just like when you plant a tree, in order for the tree to grow, you gotta put the seed at the bottom of, you gotta bury the seed first, and then the tree grows out of the seed. It was the thoughts that I was having around him, where he's now passed on, but here he is, like, teaching me the day people are crying and mourning him, I feel alive and I'm learning. And I had been reading this book. So back in February or January, if you guys could remember, I went through an experience being a city councillor, where councillors in the midst of a budgeting meeting, voted to kick me out, to silence me. And it felt very violent to me, emotionally, spiritually, and it wasn't physical, but it was so powerful that I felt very affected. But in that moment, something else was born in me, and I was just, someone mailed me a book. An anonymous person sent me a book, and I remember receiving this book feeling very skeptical. I was like, oh my God, what is this? Is there a bomb in this? Like, I was paranoid. And it took me a while to get to a place where I can read this book. It's a very tiny, tiny, tiny little book, and it's called Mental Fight. I don't know who this person is, but this person, God bless them, because they have been contributing in my sustenance in this time. I have been reading this book, and I just want to read a small passage that's in this book for you guys to take away. And it's called Mental Fight by Ben Okri. I'll write him down after. He says, and he talks about how our minds have been able to come up with solar systems. We've gone to the moon and back, and there's so many things that we've built. We've created technology. We have done so many things, but because we have not attained a place where all humanity can come together and be one and in harmony, where basic needs, the basic needs are being met, where we thrive on war, where we thrive on people dying, and we thrive on the starvation of others, our minds haven't grown. We think we've attained so much, but yet we still have so much more to attain. We still have so much more growing to do, because we now have to, and it's funny because I'm reading it now and I feel like it's really, really relevant right now, because we're shifting into a new space, into a new world. COVID has pushed us to shift into a new way of working even, and it's exposing a lot of these loopholes that we've had in our society for a long time. And now our minds are more receptive and open to go with the flow and to go with that change and that growing. And he talks about how we will only be mature. The maturity of our brain, the maturity of our minds, the maturity of our humanity will only grow when we're able to respond to the needs of the most needy. So I'll leave you guys with this little small passage in his book, and you're going to get excited and read him. So he says, we are better than that. We're greater than our despair. The negative aspects of humanity are not the most real and authentic. In our capacity to create or to overcome, to endure, to transform, to love, and to be greater than our sufferings, we are best defined by the mystery that we are still here. We can still rise upwards, still create better civilizations, that we can face our new raw realities, and that we will survive the greater despair that the greatest future might bring. So he is convinced that through this groaning and suffering and pushing is where new lives are going to be born. The mind is going to develop and go from infancy to adolescence to eventually grow into adulthood. So it was insane to me that this man is saying this, because here we are, 2020. We can Zoom, we can have a conversation through without being in the same space. there's 3D and 5D and whatever else they're going to come up with, all these big things in the world that people have been able to conceive, but yet it's still in its infancy because we haven't figured out how to come together as humanity as one, and how to transmute all of the despair and the pain and the discriminations and the hate and the genocides and the killings and all the things that we've gone through in our stupidity. So in this moment, let that, like, I'm saying it and I feel like I'm preaching because it's so powerful. It's so powerful saying that. It feels so powerful to me to understand that there is hope. And if you are losing hope or have lost hope, it's important that you step aside and allow other people who still have those dreams, who still haven't tasted the fruit of freedom, to continue to stand in this space. But our minds are at its infancy. So I'm looking forward to see what the adolescent stage is going to look like, and better yet, what the adulthood stage of our minds together as one in our humanity is going to look like. So I'll leave you guys on that.
Thank you, Arielle. Oh, it's so inspiring. Are there any other panelists who'd like to speak to this question?
At the risk of not contributing as much as that did, Arielle, thank you. I just want to say too, just particularly thinking about who might be in this room with us, the Baha'i community. I just want to speak to that a little bit because I'm also learning about that. One of the things that was at stake for me in not having these conversations over the years is that my kids, I think, just learned that it wasn't okay to talk about things that weren't part of the dominant culture. And that then rippled into talking about being a person of God. Because when they went to school, that wasn't popular. And that to me is a huge risk for anybody who, because I think everything Arielle's talking about comes about through our Creator and with that support, and it's not going to happen without that. And when we can't talk about God or Creator or Spirit or whatever that is, whatever transcends us as humanity in helping us to move through to that adulthood, when we can't do that, or when we feel that's not okay, that's what was at risk for my kids. Because they couldn't then, if they felt like they couldn't talk about who they were in as a racial person, racialized person, they just gradually got silenced. And this is the nature of dominant culture, right? Like my daughter as well. Her best subject was math. She was brilliant in math. And now she doesn't think she can do math. And I'm like, what happened? And I think that mental fight is like, what are these oppressive, very subtle, very gradual, dominant culture thinking? If it's misogyny, if it's racialization, if it's secularization, you can't believe in anything. All of those things, materialism takes away like all your purpose, so that now all your purpose is to get a piece of the pie. All of these dominant narratives just gradually erode what will take us where Arielle wants us to go.
Thank you. So I want to thank each of you from the depths of my heart for what you have brought to us this morning. This has been a very powerful morning, and I feel very touched and moved, and I have learned so much and am so grateful for this opportunity. Stories are really powerful, and hearing each other's perspectives is very impactful, and that's what we've been able to do this morning. I feel like we're leaving here with a call as individuals to hold space for each other, to engage in more dialogue, to be curious and learn, to listen and validate and understand how we as individuals can contribute both negatively and how we need to contribute positively to moving towards a different reality. And I think we also leave here with a renewed commitment to thinking and acting and living with intention that will move us as individuals, as communities, as systems, and as all of humanity towards a transformed place and a place of wholeness and oneness. So thank you to each of you for your contributions to that. I know that every single person who's been part of this is leaving here with their hearts have been touched, their minds have been opened, and thank you so much. I want to let you know that we will be having, that this has been recorded, and this will be available on the London Baha'i website, and that if anyone would love to come back and listen to it, because there's so much in everything that was said, there was so much to think about and reflect on, or if you'd like to encourage others to listen to this conversation, please refer them to the London Baha'i website. And also we will be having a second event in September, our second Vision on Race Unity, Healing Racism event in September. So stay tuned for more information about what that will be about. I'd like to encourage, and I realize we're 1 minute after 12, but I'd like to invite anyone who would wish to. Our videos have been off, but I'd like to encourage you, if you wish, to put your video on, just to kind of give a wave to everyone, so that we can see who all has been part of this morning, if you wish. Thank you so much. Take care.